Stealingjune.
Our job as, as strong Christian people is to go out into the world and find the lost sheep and bring them in and plant the Holy Spirit in them, plant the seed and let God do the watering, So people eventually come into their lives, especially if people have been praying for people for so long, wanting them to get closer to Christ, but they haven't. Just stay faithful in your walk with that. And, you could be a good prayer warrior for someone. I mean, that was huge for us when we were going through our walk with Mitchell. I mean, we had so many intercessor prayers, people praying for us, people who didn't even know, that later on in life, I got to meet some of them. They said, "Oh my gosh, we've been praying for your family for years." And I'm like, "What?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Oh, I'm crying." I'm like, "Oh, the power of prayer is huge. And it'll lift you up when you can't pray." Does that make sense?
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Stealingjune, a podcast. I'm your host, Jared. On today's episode, I sit down with Beth Thorp, the author of Anewcreation, Finding Meaning in the Midst of Tragedy. She is also the co-founder and executive director of the Mitchell Thorp Foundation. Their mission is supporting families whose children suffer from life-threatening illnesses, diseases, and disorders by providing financial, emotional, and resource support to their desperate situation. Beth has been featured and interviewed on numerous TV stations, podcasts, radio shows, and magazines. I'm glad to have her on the show today. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Beth Thorp. Well, Beth, thank you for Beth Thorp. Thank you for joining me. It is so exciting to have you here on Stealingjune podcast. And tell us your story. From what I've read, very emotional. Your book is called Anewcreation. So tell us about that. Tell us how you became saved and where you are today, pretty much.
Well, that's a lot of questions in one. So let me start at the beginning. My book that just got released in the end of June, it's only been out a few months, by Morgan James Publisher out of New York. It's titled Anewcreation, Finding Meaning in the Midst of Tragedy. It's based off a memoir of my family and my son, who went through, 5-year, very hard, long journey of in and out of hospitals, finding a cure for him. He was undiagnosed to his death. Symptoms came on at the age of 13. He passed at 18. And prior to that, never went to the doctor, right? We were very healthy. And so that was just a rude awakening to our medical system of, I understand what they mean by practicing medicine now, because when it's a difficult case and they couldn't understand what was going on with him, kept passing him along or misdiagnosing him and passing him along to the next doctor, and because they couldn't figure it out. And it was a very hard journey. And when he passed at the age of 18, one of the darkest moments of our lives, obviously in a family, I told him he would not die in vain and that we would take his name and carry it forward. And we started a foundation in his name called the Mitchell Thorp Foundation, which mission is to support families with children with life-threatening illnesses, diseases, and disorders. And here we are 14 years later, giving back $3 million back into the community to help families and children fighting for their tomorrows. And you never know what God has in store when you are walking through an issue in your life. I write about it in the book, How to Be an Overcomer. and how to step out in faith when you can't see what's before you. It really was an amazing thing how God works and speaks through us all, and he wants to speak through us all. We have to have an open heart and a mind to him. The Bible verse, seek and knock and you will find, right?
Mm-hmm.
God's a gentleman. He's not going to force himself on you, but you have the freedom of choice and the choice to make that, to listen to him. And through my faith, which is very strong, and in my family, in my deepest pain and grief, curled up in a ball, not wanting to be on the planet anymore. After my son died, a part of me died with him.
Right.
He spoke to my spirit and said, this is not the end. This is the beginning. And when I heard that deep within my soul, not so much audible, it comes up in your spirit and then illuminates your mind. That's kind of how God speaks. And you know it can't come from anyone else but him. Like, who would have said that to me, right?
Right.
And I sat up in my bed and I was like, what? What does that mean? This is not the end. This is the beginning. It feels like it's the end, God. I don't want. Anyway, so it was 5 years of journey of helping my son, 2 years to heal and come out of it. And during that healing process, my husband was at the local church here in California. And in Southern California, we live in the southern part. And he specifically heard from God too. That same week I heard, and he said that God really spoke to me that we need to form a bridge to help many families going through what we went through. We should start a foundation. And he came on to tell me that. And I was like, you want to do what? I was like, what? I said, we know nothing about starting a foundation. What does that mean? And then I had to sit back and think, is that what you meant, God? This is not the end. This is the beginning. And think about it. I'm talking to you now 14 years later. And,
right.
And the fingerprints of God through it all, and how he took our pain and put it to purpose is amazing. And really, when COVID hit and shut everything down, it quieted my world. There were so many people that kept saying over the years, oh, you really need to tell your story. You really should write your story and what happened and what came of it. And oh my gosh, look at all the people, you keep hearing that and you're like, okay, I better get to it. And then finally I knew it in my heart. I wanted to write it. And again, that still small voice came up through that again. I don't hear it all the time, but when I do, boy, you recognize it. And then when God speaks, absolutely, you move. And when he said to me, daughter, when COVID hit and shut all my events down with the foundation, quieted my world, he said, daughter, it's time to write our story. So we are a witness. When I write this book, Anewcreation, we are a witness for Christ living through us of what we went through and how we carried out our daily walk. And I encourage your audience, when they are going through a challenging time in their life, if you don't have a firm foundation, you will not be able to stand.
Yeah.
So you really have to have that foundation of Christ in your life. Invite him into your life. Ask him to forgive you of your sins. That's what he is. That's how Jesus came to the world. He's a redeemer. He wants to come in and make your life well. He doesn't want you to feel all this pain, suffering. And believe me, he knows he suffered a lot. And for us, and ultimately died on the cross to save us all. But, he also, God gave us freedom of choice, freedom of free will. So we have to be open to him.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find that interesting. Is that what you heard throughout this whole time, that it's not the end, it's the beginning? Like, is that what the main message was? And I mean, I kind of only bring that up because, like, a few months prior for me personally in this journey and starting this podcast, was the words always came up, for such a time as this, and everything. And so is that, like the main theme God was speaking to you, or was, there's something else or a verse that kept coming up into mind?
Oh, all the time. He speaks to me all the time. And,
right.
But you have to kind of have that. You have to spend time in his word, and you have to spend time in reading his word. And my exercise in the morning is to do that. And It's almost like you have to put it in your schedule. And if you're not used to doing that with your audience, you need to open up that Bible. Sometimes the Bible can get very confusing for people, especially if you're a new believer.
Yeah.
But find passages. I would say start in the book of Psalms. Start in the book of Psalms. They're encouraging. Find scripture that because that His living word is alive and well. And before I even open the Bible, I say, okay, Lord, speak to me. What is it you have to say to me today? And so find those. When you say, I call it divine order. For everything, there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. And that's under Ecclesiastes 3:1. And yeah, sometimes as humans, it's hard because we can't see what's ahead of us. That's where you walk by faith, not by sight. And as it was written in 2 Corinthians 5:7. So people have a hard time at that. They're like, what? I have to see it before I can believe it, right? So I'm like doubting Thomas, one of his disciples. I have to see you, Jesus, before I believe. So there are many doubting Thomases out there in the world, but ask the Lord to show Himself real to you. If you're in the deepest pits of the whatever, which we were before we could come out of the pit to see the light of day after my son's passing, you have to ask the Lord to show Himself real to you. Show me what's next. Take me through what it is for me to do next. What is it? And so that's where you have to have that faith. So when I talk to people about faith, I tell them faith doesn't always take you out of the problem. Faith takes you through the problem.
Yeah.
And if you have a strong faith, faith doesn't always take away the pain, but faith gives you the ability to handle the pain. And faith doesn't always take you out of the storms of life, because believe me, we all get hit with storms of life, right?
Absolutely.
Faith will help you calm the storm in the midst of it. So I think that's what Jesus was just trying to tell His disciples when the storm hit, when He was in the boat and He was asleep, right?
Yeah.
And the disciples are waking Him up going, Jesus, don't you care? Look, we were going to drown. But Jesus, I think, used that analogy. And I was just hearing a pastor locally to talk about that. He uses that passage to show us that if you have me in your life, you can quiet the storms. Where is your faith and how strong is your faith? And so that was an interesting passage that just might be helpful to some of your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So take me back. I guess I read the first chapter of your book. So take us back to the beginning of how your family became a family, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's interesting. I was a very young lady. I was 19. I met my husband, Brad, who was playing and was drafted with the Los Angeles Dodgers. Okay, don't hold it against him, your audience. You're not a Dodger fan.
I'm not. I'm not. I'm actually a Seattle Mariners fan, but I did find that interested when I read the first chapter.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was a world. Baseball was a huge part of our life, and when we first met and we got married, and all of that was an amazing kind of whirlwind life. And until he tore out his rotator cuff and kind of ended his career as a pitcher. But, he played with Fernando Valenzuela, if any of you remember him. He was known for the screwball pitch and Oral Hershiser. That was his group. So, and to this day, he stays in contact with Fernando. And it's written in the book when Fernando was so gracious when Mitchell was still with us for his 13th birthday, we took him to Dodger Stadium and gave him a private tour of everything. And it was, I think it was the best birthday Mitchell could have ever had, because soon after that is when the symptoms started to come on for him. So we were happy for that. So baseball kind of intertwines in the story how we first met and all the learning lessons the boys got to learn. And Mitchell was just one of those gifted, again, players. We allowed our boys to play various sports to see where they landed, but obviously baseball, he was just gifted. I'd stand behind home plate as he's come up to the plate, and here he is. He's only 12, 11, 12 years old, and And other dads would be back. They didn't know I was his mom. And all I hear the dad say, boy, I love to see this kid swing, you know? So
Right. Yeah.
that's his swing on the front of the book. I mean, that's him. His pictures on there. And it's crazy. At the age of 12, these high schooler coaches are already drafting, where's he going to high school? They want to make sure where he's going, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it did devastate a lot of people locally in my community when they began to read, what was going on with our family in Mitchell. And I'll tell you another beautiful thing about community. I mean, to me, our community was so supportive. People we didn't even know. I mean, people came to our side and in and out of hospitals, okay, for 5 years, all over the United States looking for answers. I mean, there wasn't a stone left unturned. We were trying so desperately to save our son. And when he was still with us, the community knew of our hardship of trying to pay off our medical bills. And that's even with good insurance, right?
Right. Yeah.
We ended up leaving UCLA with $100,000 medical bill with good insurance. So you're like, okay.
Right. And this was 14 years ago. So,
yeah. And that's with good. Okay. So they formed and did the very first walkathon. They said, we want to help your family. We're going to do a walkathon. We'll spread the word. There was like 600 people or so that came out. People we didn't even know did a walkathon to help us pay off. They raised $70,000 to help us pay off that bill. And that changed us tremendously. Forever changes you. And we wanted to be able to pay that forward one day. At that time, we felt one day, boy, we'd love to pay that forward. We were so blessed to see how the community rallied around our family. We were just like, wow. So that's part of that story and his journey. But then the most beautiful thing in the story is after his passing, Mitchell tried so desperately want to communicate with us, and how I write a chapter, Speaking Beyond the Veil of Heaven. And I document all the things that he was trying to show us. And so I don't want to give all this story.
Right,
people have to get the book to read it. Right. But that'll give you an understanding that heaven is for real. And there is a beautiful place on the other side. And it was just unbelievable, all the signs. But if you are not open to understanding how God speaks, or so you can see the signs that are meant specifically for you to see, then you'll miss it. So you have to open your heart.
And that's what, in doing my preparation for this interview, I've also, listened to some of the other podcasts you've been on and whatever, and you were talking about the sense of community, the community coming together. I mean, the best thing now, where I come from a really small town, about 2,000 people or so. But, and my grandfather was a pastor, and I remember when he went home to be with the Lord, just people out of the woodworks, in his funeral, and just coming together and making sure my grandma had everything they needed, and including repairing a house that they bought, and help getting that done for some of the parts and everything. So what were your emotions when you realized these people you didn't even know were just coming around and supporting you?
It, like I said, it forever changed us. It forever changed us. We were never the same. And it was just a beautiful thing to witness and be a part of. And that's why it's important to have community. Community is one of the most important things if you think about that in the world, if all the nation had communities that would look out and come and help each other and be more bonded to each other, it'd be a much peaceful place and helpful place.
Yeah.
And some people don't even know their neighbors, for heaven's sakes, so it's like, you got to get out of yourself.
Right.
And once you get out of yourself, this me society, it's all about me.
Right.
And get out of yourself and look to help someone else, you'll start to feel yourself I don't know, it changes your heart, changes your mind. It's like you feel good about what you're doing. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm beginning to see what this is about. And I understand that with people because, prior to that, we were living our lives and, we were faithful people, but we were just a young married couple, right? Trying to make ends meet like everyone else. And you never think anything bad could ever happen. And sure enough, when something like that does, it just pulls the rug out from underneath you and you're not expecting anything like this. So for us to walk alongside families now and be that light in the dark for them, because the fear and the stresses are off the charts when you're dealing with things like this, that we can walk in and do God's work, go into the hospitals, meet the family and the child. We don't know where they are in their walk with the Lord, but usually most people don't deny when we ask, can we pray for you, right? No one's going to say, no, you can't pray for me. No one's ever said, no, you can't pray for me, because they're in the most desperate situation, right? So it's our way, it's our mission, you could say, our missionary, to go in and help families and be that light in the dark for them, and to let them know they're not alone and not feeling isolated, because you do feel very isolated. Think about COVID when everyone was isolated. No one could see anybody. That's just a taste of what some of these families have to endure all the time when their child is diagnosed with a life-threatening medical condition. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's another thing I kind of want to touch on. I think it was, I don't know the exact quote, but Johnny Erickson Tada was talking, I believe, about pain and about having to go through it, and something to the effects that, God gave us this pain in order so that we know what other people are going through. And how did you ever see it that way after you lost your son? What were your steps in going through those darker days? Did someone have to bring it to light to you? Was it something that, you had to work out through your prayers, or?
Yeah, well, that's part of what we call healing and restoration process. When you lose someone you love, there's stages of grief. The first is usually shock, and that's feelings of shock. They're unavoidable. I was like a deer in headlights. You're in shock, and then usually the second phase is denial. That's the second one. This can't be happening. This is a bad dream. Wake me up from this dream.
Yeah, right.
And then the third usually follows anger for many people. Why did this happen to us, right? That's usually part of the grief process. And it's okay to get angry. God got angry. Jesus was angry in the temple courts. It's okay to express your anger just as long as you don't sin in that anger.
Right.
Then the fourth stages of grief are bargaining. Some people bargain when you're on your deathbed. I promise I'll never ask for anything if you only will do XYZ, right? Bargaining with God. I will follow you, God, forever if you, right? They start bargaining with God.
Right.
And then people will fall into depression, is usually the fifth stage. That happened, yes. I was in the deepest part of my pain. I suffered from PTSD, which was post-stress, disorder, because we were in the battlefields day in and day out with my son for 5 years. And then you are literally exhausted. And then usually the last phase, 2 phases of dealing with grief, it's acceptance and hope, and knowing that you know where he is, and that you will see him again. And you have to think of your loved ones. If you ever lost someone in your life, try not to think of them in your past, but think of them that you will see them in your future.
Right.
So one of the things that helped us, my husband and I, was we knew we needed therapy, and it's okay to ask for help. So if you know you need help, it's okay to ask for help. You can remove that pride.
Absolutely.
Because in our case, I couldn't do it on my own. I needed someone else. So we sought out our spiritual counselor at the time to work with Brad and I as a married couple, because your marriage is so strained at the time, right? So there are things that of forgiveness that we had to walk through, that she broke things off us that we both had. She worked on my husband first and then me, and then forgiving, the whole process of forgiveness, forgiving the doctors that couldn't find the answers, forgiving people who said things they shouldn't have said, everything that you keep over the years that come in, and you're hanging on to this, and if you don't release it, it'll torment people. And that's when people become bitter and angry at God, and they don't believe in God. Why did you do this to me? Why did you, that's that whole anger and bitterness, right? And they can't seem to get out of it. They're stuck in that phase. So in order to move forward, there's a process of healing that needs to take place. So I would encourage your audience to, if there anyone who's listening that's in that, seek help. It's okay to ask for help. Find someone that you feel trusting, that you can talk to. You're in a small town, maybe it's a pastor in your community, or someone you feel comfortable you can share your emotions with to help you with your grief.
Yeah. I mean, and that's something I've always, I wouldn't say had in my mind, but I know of a family, that went through almost a similar situation. They lost their eldest child to cystic fibrosis. And I just, I always wondered, how they kind of got through the pain and the grief, through that. So it's always good to hear a fresh perspective, I guess.
Yes. Well, they should get my book, Anewcreation. They would love it.
Yes.
And it might stir up some things, but people say when they read it, you made me laugh, you made me cry, and then you made me find hope and all those things, right? So that's how a good book should do. And some of the reviews already have been, oh my gosh, I couldn't put your book down. It was an easy read. I kept wanting to see what happened next. And so that's what you hope as an author that you want. And I have beautiful pictures after each chapter. So the pictures will give people, a picture says 1,000 words. It makes it feel like a script. And we actually have interest in a film producer already. It's only been out 3 months. So our end game is to take it to film. And so we'll see what God has in store for that. We serve a great big God. He's taken us this far.
Absolutely.
And he knows our heart. So, we'll see what happens in a few years if that can happen.
Yeah. And now your book, as far as I understand, all the proceeds go to the Mitchell Thorpe Foundation. Is that correct?
Exactly. You can get Anewcreation anywhere where books are sold, online, Barnes & Noble. I don't know what you have in your town. Most people go online, or you can actually go to my website, anewcreation.org, if you want me to personally sign it, give an inspirational message to you, whoever comes. Sure. And usually I do that. I just kind of get a sense of who's writing to me, and I'll sign and autograph the book for you and mail it off. So any which way, it's out there right now, worldwide.
Good. Yes, I will make sure to tell everyone I know to go out and get this book. And I'm definitely gonna buy myself one copy, just to have, that's the thing. When I started, this podcast, when I decided to go on this journey and everything, I was never much of a reader. And then I realized when I was doing my research for interviews and everything like that, I was like, well, that means I'm just gonna have to read more and research their books and everything. So I think that's a good discipline for me to actually, start reading more and stop doing unproductive, things.
Exactly. Hey, think of this, for your audience, I'm a first-time author. So writing was not really my strong suit either. So isn't that interesting how God can work with you? He usually takes those who are ill-equipped and will equip you, and you'll find a way. So isn't that interesting how that works?
Yeah, how was that writing process for you?
Yeah.
You said you weren't,
No, writing wasn't my thing,
it's
and
not my thing either.
so,
I
but it was sitting in my heart for so long. And when people kept saying to me, like I said earlier, oh, you really need to write your story. You need to tell your story. Oh my gosh, look what's came out of this. And then I tell people how Mitchell was speaking to us beyond the veil of heaven and all this. And he said, oh, you got to document that. You got to write this. So then you keep hearing that enough. You're like, okay. So, well, like I said, when COVID hit, shut all my events down with the foundation and quieted my world. And when I heard God speak to me, it's time to write our story. I was like, okay. And I got to it. And so it was 9 months to write the manuscript. Then I found my editor and I worked another 6 months with my editor, basically rewrite the whole thing. It was because she wanted me to add dialogue in to the writing, and I've never written that way. So she was stretching me to write dialogue, almost like a script, because I had to read like a story, because that's how I wanted it. It's not a how-to book. It's a story.
Right.
And it's taking you on a journey with us. And so ultimately 15 months to write it. And then once it was done, I had to organize and put a book proposal together. And then I heard people say, you think writing your book was hard? Then they say, try getting it published. Right? I mean, people have written books and then they can't get published. But another miracle? I picked a publisher. I had this big book to go through on different publishers. And you're like, oh my gosh, Lord, where do you begin? This book was like super thick. And you start going through it. And like, where do I send this to? I may start sending these all out to all these people and whatnot. So I ended up calling a gal who was an author who wrote the book Heaven is for Real. I don't know if you saw the movie.
I do know of the book. Yes, I do.
She lives here. And I met her 2 years ago in a conference, and I just happened to, that fear of, oh, she'll never take my call, right? So I called her and I said, I don't know if you remember me, but I was in my heart to write this story, and I would love for you to look at my book proposal and tell me what I need to do differently or where I should go with it. And so really reaching out to a connection, that was my first connection. And she was a godsend to narrow down the publishers for me, where to send to, instead of trying to send to this whole, where do you begin, Lord? Right?
Yeah, right.
And so I did. I submitted to this. I said, go big or go home. So I went and hit this big one in New York. And I'll tell you, I got the congratulations letter. It's hanging on my wall. I'm looking at it right now. The week of Mitchell's passing in November. That letter came through and it says, congratulations. I'll take it off the wall and see. And I'll read it to you. It says, I was like, dear Beth, congratulations. Your manuscript proposal, Anewcreation, has been accepted by Morgan James Publishing. Welcome to the Morgan James family. I'm thrilled to have you as one of our authors, and I appreciate you and your affiliation with Morgan James. More information and instructions will follow, but thank you again for submitting your proposal and your lifelong relationship, and signed by the CEO. I mean, I'm waving this to the heavenlies. I'm like, oh, Lord, you are good. I mean, I'm crying, I'm weeping. I'm like, oh, Mitchell and God, you really must want your story out there. This is a beautiful story. And we are just being a witness for Christ through it, how he worked through us. And I think people really need to know about that. It's a true, there's nothing held back. It's a very true, authentic story. It's an inspirational story. Like I said, it took people on a roller coaster ride, but that's what a good book should do, like a good movie, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it always amazes me, like, when God is in the works. And everything, like your story, and I can think of several different stories, like when my grandma went to sell her house a year or so ago. She got like an offer the next day for exactly what she wanted. It's just amazing when he's in the works and you're on the right track. And similarly, like, I started looking for podcast guests and everything. I'm like, well, who's going to want to talk to me? Who accomplishes, gonna want to talk to me, someone who's just starting out and doesn't have much traction going for himself right now, and that's when several people started to reach out for this, and I just been so blessed by it.
Exactly. And and you will grow, and you'll be a better host. You'll learn how to perfect it by listening to other podcasts and other hosts who've been doing it a long time. And
Oh yeah, yeah,
and you'll just grow with it, and you'll see yourself just grow and mature in your walk at the same time.
yeah. I definitely, and I'm a semi perfectionist. So when I was in development, I needed everything to be just perfect and just right, and then something reminded me that not everything has to be perfect all at once. And if I'm
Right.
waiting for that to be perfect, then I'm never going to be ready. And I'm just like, well, I I just got to go with it.
Yeah, that's what you do. It's called that leap of faith,
Yeah.
right? You know how many times God takes us all to the edge and he says, okay, get out of the boat, step
Right.
over. It's like, I don't want to go. Oh, well, if you want this to happen, you got to go. You have to do it. And even when you're not, like I said, when you're not totally equipped and ready, it's just, you just have to ask him to help you, guide
Yeah.
you, and equip you when you're not.
Well, and the Bible is full of stories, of people. You think of Moses, standing in
Oh,
front of the
yeah.
burning bush, and he's like, I can't speak and I can't lead in all this, and
And go
just
save your people, all the people, and bring them out of
yeah,
Egypt. I think you got
yeah,
the wrong guy, right?
right. And I mean, the Bible is full of, and that's the thing that I've found interesting over my studies the last few months. Like I was listening to J. Vernon McGee do a study through Judges, and realizing that all the judges that he picked weren't perfect in any way, but they were all able to deliver Israel in their time of need.
Right.
And everything. And it just amazes me how God takes what the world would deem insignificant people and use them to the benefit. Not someone who has everything together.
Yes. Think about all the disciples he picked. I mean, they were all a ragtag team, so it's just like he uses us all. And that's what the beautiful thing that people need to realize. People say, well, I don't know the Bible well. I don't know if I could do this. You just have to tell your story and just tell how people helped, how God redeemed you or brought you through, which can be an encouragement to someone else that may need to hear it. So our job as, as strong Christian people is to go out into the world and find the lost sheep and bring them in and plant the Holy Spirit in them, plant the seed and let God do the watering, So people will eventually come into their lives, especially if people have been praying for people for so long, wanting them to get closer to Christ, but they haven't. Just stay faithful in your walk with that. And, you could be a good prayer warrior for someone. I mean, that was huge for us when we were going through our walk with Mitchell. I mean, we had so many intercessor prayers, people praying for us, people who didn't even know, that later on in life, I got to meet some of them. They said, oh my gosh, we've been praying for your family for years. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I'm crying. I'm like, oh, the power of prayer is huge. And it'll lift you up when you can't pray. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So surround yourself with people who can kind of lift you up in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, I told someone that a month or so ago, someone I knew in high school who's making his journey to becoming a pastor and everything. And when I was still attending that church, I'd see him come in with his mom every once in a while, and I would pray for him. And to see him one day during the shutdown, I saw him preaching a message, and I was like, well, praise God, he made it. And everything. It's so great when your prayers come through answered as a yes, but what about the times of Mitchell when, your prayers uh during that time obviously didn't come through in the way you expected them to? What was your thought process on that?
Exactly. Talk about a test of your faith. Oh, it was a test of your faith. And because we had people praying for us, laying hands on Mitchell, pastors coming in and out. He was on so many different prayer lists in churches, you know, and then that's part of the pain of that questioning. Why, God? Why didn't we get our miracle? Where was our miracle? And that was a part of processing for me and my family, to be healed from. And at the time when we were walking with Mitchell, and I would often sit with him outside, and he was in his wheelchair, and butterflies were floating around us in the backyard. I'm like, oh, I was like, Mitchell, one day God's going to heal you and make you well. But in my mind, I was thinking earthly.
Right.
My mind did not go to the other side of this world, to heaven. He had to ultimately take him home to heal him, because no one could figure it out here on this earth. Do you believe that? In this day and age, they couldn't diagnose what was wrong. And I might never know all the answers. And, I just know where he is. I know when he was showing us those signs after his passing. And that's why I titled it Anewcreation. You'll read it in chapter 35, I think it is. And he knew I would know what that meant. Anyway, it's a beautiful thing to see. But ultimately, God had to take him home to heal him. And I wasn't thinking that way. I was thinking he would heal him here. But that was what I had to do, what we call total surrender. And that was really challenging for me as a mom, because moms are supposed to make it better, right? And I couldn't make it better.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very hard for me. As any mom, as your children, you want to make things better from the day they first bump their knee or hit their head. Come in, Mom, make it better. But I couldn't make it better. And it was one of the hardest things. I had to surrender finally onto my knees and surrender Mitchell to God, and said, I can't, I can't, I don't know what to do here. Only you can heal him, God. It's your will be done, not mine. Right.
Right.
So, and ultimately, obviously his will was to take him home to heal him. But that's when he did not leave me or my husband's side or my other son, Matthew. And he carried us through to where we are today. And for your audience, believe me, that was nothing on our brains of starting a foundation and helping children. That wasn't even there yet. Think about that. It wasn't there yet. And we're still walking through the healing process. And it's as though he wrapped his loving arms around me. I felt it. I can speak to my own personal testimony. My husband would have to speak to his, but I felt him just carrying me along one step at a time. I'm going to walk you through it because I was so vulnerable, coming out of the pain of grief. And it's difficult. Grief is real and it's hard. And they usually say the deeper the love, the harder the grief. Right?
Right.
And obviously losing a child is a very hard grief. It's like they shouldn't go before you, right? That's the whole thing of I'm losing that. But it's an exercise. It's a practice, knowing that, okay, I can now see the fingerprints of God, like I said, through our story. Now that I can look back on it from God's perspective and not mine in the moment. And I can see what he did and what he orchestrated, and all these children and families who we've helped, and helped them with, not only financially, but emotionally and spiritually, and with resources. That my son obviously was a living sacrifice for us to do God's work here. And so one thing you need to know with how God works is he wants to use his people. You'll find people who are alcoholics or drug addicts, and they come clean, and they can use their testimony to help others. And, he'll use us all, but we just have to
Right.
be open to wanting to be used.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do want to get to the foundation here in a second. So you said you had another son, Matthew.
Yes.
Yes.
He's 30 now. He just turned 30. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. How time flies. I'm going to be 34 here in a few months. So, um, yeah, I can't believe it either. But so how was that? You lose Mitchell and everything, but you're still a mom to this other child. What was that process like for you?
Yeah,
Like you still have to parent this one child, even though you just lost your other one.
exactly. And that was I think for me, when I was, like I said, curled up in a ball and didn't want to be on the planet anymore. And when God spoke to me, this is not the end, this is the beginning. And I started to pull myself up of my, as you say, your bootstraps. And then it's like one of those, okay, I've got to pull it together. I have to be a wife to my husband who's also hurting. And I have another son who's really hurting. He just lost his brother.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to pull it together as a mom because everyone grieves in their own way, right? So, and the grief will hit people at different times. And that's the other thing. So I always tell people when I have to speak on grief, be patient with one another, because you could be driving along in the car and all of a sudden you hear a song or something triggers something and you're like a
Right.
wreck and you're pulling off on the side of the road. You're a bawling mess, so you really don't know when it hits. So yes, I knew with my son, Matthew, there was a lot of things that I had to help him through. And even to this day, he can talk about it, but it's still very painful for him.
Right.
And, he has done amazing. But yes, there's been times I said, there's some deep seated pain there. And do we need to seek help for you still? Do you need, until this day, we have this conversation and he says no, but I think myself being his coach, his mom, his coach of how to handle grief. And he's in a world now. He's a photojournalist for ABC News. So he's in the world. I said, you're of the world, but you're not of it. So I need to
Right.
keep him grounded because he sees and witnesses things that, yeah. So I keep him grounded in faith and know where he needs to keep his mind and his thoughts, and to release knowing that God is in control, even when this world is in such chaos and
Right.
upside down and inside out. That's where I'm telling people in your audience, you got to stay plugged into God because he ultimately is in control, and we need to seek to him for his kingdom come, right? Thy will be done
Right. Right.
on earth as it is in heaven. And we need to call his kingdom forward on earth as it is in heaven. And we should all be on our hands and knees praying the Our Father all the time. I do it every day, that his kingdom come, his will be done. And that's what I had learned now when we walk in hospitals and deal with so many children with so many different issues, from cancer to all kinds of medical conditions. It breaks my heart. I understand what God is. We can do our part to lay hands and heal. But ultimately, before we walk in, we say, God, it's your will be done, not mine. Right? It's always his will. His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And I had to learn that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And how, obviously, you lose your one son. You have now one son out in the world doing his own thing. And you still want him, grounded in that faith like any good mother would want. So how much of that is knowing that you have to let him do his own thing, live his own life, but, does he still call you for advice or
every day?
Every day?
Isn't that a beautiful thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Usually children are like, okay, they'll call your mom once a month or something.
Yeah.
But he's he's got a tender heart, and I know him, and he's more sensitive, more sensitive soul. But God bless him. I said, Lord, I pray for him every day that, he lifts him up and protects him and is coming and going in the world that he's in. And I just kind of lead him. Yes, I knew in his heart, God needed to take him out of this arena of where he grew up, obviously, and everything that happened and surrounded us and our family. He needed to spread his wings and go. And as any parent, you want them like out of the bird nest. You got to go. You got to fly. You got to live. You have to spread your wings. Go, young one. Go live your life and do and live. And I want you to be happy and all that and live your life to the fullest. And I'm very proud of him with that in that respect, and that he's took charge of that. But get this, I mean, the book came out, and first of all, I asked his permission, as any one mother and parent should. Before I began to write, I said, Matthew, Mom wants to write our story, everything we went through, and Mitchell and what came out of it and everything. And are you okay with me telling this story to the world? And I waited to hear his answer. And he said, yeah, Mom, it's okay. And I said, okay. So just last week, which was beautiful, I had a book signing at Barnes & Noble in Arizona. And that's where he is right now, in Arizona. I said, Mom gets to come out to Arizona. Get this. I'm at a book signing with 7 other authors. And I get to see you at the same time. I said, this is awesome. So it was really great to be able to connect. And he now told, the producers at his station at ABC that his mom is out. She's a book author now. They're like, what? So, so it's kind of like he's saying it's, this message and this story is bigger than us. Does that make sense? Right. I had to get him to the place of, yes, this was so painful that happened to all of us in our family, Matthew, but look what God has done with it. And he wants, it's bigger than us. And we've got to let God take a hold of this story and get it out to the masses to help many.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if this is more of a question for Matthew or not, but did he ever struggle with his faith after losing his brother? Or?
Oh, I'm sure. Yes. I didn't cry it out and ask him, but when he was going through his grief, I mean, like I said, everyone grieves in their way. He was in the backyard at that point. And, he was in high school at the time. So he was, when all this happened to him too. Mm-hmm. And so that's why under the foundation, we help one of our programs, sibling support, because the siblings get forgotten, right?
Right.
Because the parents are in the hospital day in and day out, but it affects the whole family. So, yeah, I mean, after his passing, he was in the backyard. Oh my goodness. I mean, he was yelling and screaming at God. He was throwing patio furniture. I thought, oh my gosh, they're going to call the police on us. The neighbors are. Right. He was angry. Oh, he was so upset. He was so angry. And then I finally called my pastor, and what a good pastor should do. And he came over the next day, took Matthew for a walk on the beach, which was beautiful. And the two of them. And that's when you kind of know you need to have someone else intervene besides mom and dad, right?
Absolutely.
You have to have someone else come in and work with them. And, to me, there's not enough programs out there for grief for siblings, but there are through churches, grief support. Right. But they need an avenue, especially if they're young children, right? And they lose their daddies or their mommies or whatever, so there has to be a way. And through churches are a good way to do programs like Grief Share. I know our local churches do them here. I don't know about yours, but, Grief Share for the family. So get them involved in that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And from my perspective growing up, not that my parents, never gave us, it's never short to give me advice or my siblings or anything. For me, like the pastor I grew up with, family friend and everything, he's given me a lot of advice. And through all my, the pain and suffering I went through when I lost my grandfather 22 years ago, I was still dealing with that, and I would get mad at God sometimes more of a why did you have to take him when you took him type of thing. And for me to realize that, you know, some of the advice that my grandfather would have given me on the earth came from other people that knew him, really helped me. And also for, like I said, my pastor to give me advice, you know, or a friend, a good friend grounded in faith, that is, to give other young people advice that isn't coming from a parent, I think really helps.
Yes, and that's why it is important to do that. And you know, there's not a day that goes by like you don't think of your I can't go a day without thinking of my
Right.
son Mitchell. There's not a day that I'm talking to him like today, and I wake up and say, "Okay, Mitch, we're going to tell your story again to the world." So come with me. He's sitting here. We're going to tell your story. And there's not a day that probably you don't go by and think of your grandfather or what he would have said to you. So here's the thing too, with all that, you know, it's beautiful. God will use, you know, other people to speak through them to get to you too. So that's the cool thing about when you're walking and helping unbelievers in their walk. Like I said, you can plant the seed, but you ask God, please do the watering. And sometimes, again, God will bring other people into their lives, you know, and it's a process, right? And it's a process before that's all you do. It's all you can do is this, Lord, I can give my testimony and plant the seed here, but you got to do the watering.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Mitchell Thorpe Foundation, I know you said it. Let's recap. What is the mission of the foundation?
Yes, the mission is supporting families with children with life-threatening illnesses, diseases, and disorders by providing financial, emotional, and resource support.
Wow, you said that so easy.
I know, I've been doing it for 14 years.
I gotta be honest. So after I got this show booked and everything, I was working on the plug before, or the intro to the podcast before everything. I was trying to say that part, and it took, I don't know, it took like 800 or 900 takes in order for me to actually, it was.
Oh my goodness. Well, hopefully it came off your tongue and rolled off a little easier each time. But so it is but it does explain everything we do. And we, under that foundation, we have several programs. We have our medical and home assistance. That's one program that helps with anything not covered under insurance, keeps the roof over people's heads, food on the table, and lights on, you know, anything under medical and home assistance. Then we started that was our first program. Then it grew into our healing and rehabilitation program, which was our second program. And we found that when a lot of the families left the hospitals with their kids, they needed to continue with the therapy that they weren't getting enough of in the hospital, or they needed counseling. Again, we provide counseling services for the whole family unit. And we are happy to say that we've kept families that come to us married, we've kept 100% together and not end in divorce or separation. Because statistically, 76% end in divorce or separation because of the hardship. So we were very proud of that. And then our third program came out of our wheelchair conversion vans. Not all of our kids need it, but some children are just wheelchair bound for their life. And families, we get them to fundraise with us, because that's a very expensive unit, right? To buy and get a van and then convert it to a wheelchair lift. So we'll kind of help with the wheelchair lift component, but they have to fundraise for the vehicle itself. And then we have our youth leadership program. That's kind of a cool thing that came out of over the last 12 years. We found that a lot of the kids in the schools liked our events. We do a big 5K run walk every year. We do a baseball tournament, and they would need community service hours. So kids like helping kids. So we started a servant leadership training program, and we meet once a month. We train them on what it means to be a servant leader in their community. Again, working on that next generation and what it means to give back to those less fortunate.
Good. Yeah. And what are I guess, how accepting were families when they found out about this program? What's some of the advice that, you know, you have given to them? And I'm, you know, sure, how do I want to word it? Some of these families didn't get the results that they wanted as well. So, what was some of the advice you would give to these moms or dads that were with their kids and were scared?
Oh, yeah, it's a lot. Think of young families, and these things are happening all around them, and it's just so disruptive in the whole family unit. It's just, you try to come in and create some sense of normalcy. I think for us, we let them know they're not alone and that they usually have to fill out an application. It's a family application for assistance. It usually comes from the social workers from the hospitals. Social workers usually determine what families are hit the hardest. They have nothing left, and they'll give them resources, try to apply to this foundation or that foundation for help and assistance. So there's a full application they fill out. We review it. We have a whole set of board of directors. So we sit down with all our cases and we determine what we can do to help them. Usually there's a question asked, what would bring the most relief to your family at this moment? And then you see what it would be. And we customize it to each family, which I'm getting ready after our call. I've got about 5 cases to go and call families right after we speak of what we're approved to help them with. And just that little bit of relief, that sigh of relief, is a big help. The emotional support is knowing that they can come to us for prayer or counseling if they need that for the family, knowing that there's an organization there that can help them along their walk, because usually cancer treatments are usually 18 months long, and that's kind of a long walk.
Right.
And so we get them to come alongside in our fundraisers, and we have a crowdfunding page on our Mitchell Thorpe Foundation website with each child. And when people donate to the foundation, it's a nonprofit, so they get a tax write-off. Anyone who wants to go to the Mitchell Thorpe Foundation and check out all the children and families that are trying to raise some extra funds for things, they can pick a child to donate to, or just donate to the general fund, and we'll put it out to families that are coming in. We're always getting applications in monthly.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Now, do you have pastors on staff for your foundation or hired counselors, or how does that work?
No, it's usually just us right now. And I have, we have spiritual people that we can counselors refer to, or if they don't want a spiritual counsel, we have psychologists in different areas of their specialty of trauma or marriage. So we will have a set resources of we give to them for them to interview and see where they best fit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we don't want to prescribe it, because every family is different, right? Their beliefs are different. Their walk is different. So we'll have a whole list of them, and we'll tell them, just, talk to them and just see which one you guys align with, or where your child feels best with. And that would be the one to go with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine there are families out there that have used or have come through the Mitchell Thorpe Foundation that were surprised, I guess is the word, by what you guys provide and do, or relieved in some way.
We decide as a foundation, and we see how some other foundations work. We just don't give out a gas card and a grocery card and say good luck and hope all is well. We tell them, once you are accepted, you're part of the MTF family, and we'll walk alongside you as long as we can. But if it's very long term, you're going to have to help fundraise for their situation as well. I mean, the foundation can grant up to a certain amount. And then if it's going to be a lifelong process, then they need to kind of come along and start fundraising for their needs as well. But we thought we'd rather help less, but give more significantly. Okay, so, yeah. It's to me, if we can help pay for a family's mortgage for a couple months, or something. What a relief, a dad would say, or a mom, like, oh, just to get through that, to free up, to help them with other things. Or maybe it's a co-payment at the medical hospital that they need help with, or things like that. So those are bigger, substantial in terms of money than just a gas card and a grocery gift card.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just blown away by the whole, the Mitchell Thorpe Foundation, your story, your book, Anewcreation, or what I've read of it so far. And it has been a real blessing and honor to have you. So one more time, tell us your book, where they can get it, and the website for the foundation if people want to go there and donate.
To a child. Perfectly. Yes. Anewcreation.org is where you can find me and my book if you want it autographed. If you want to buy it online or at a Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold, you can get it there too. And once you're done reading it, as any author, we love reviews. So you can put a review on Amazon, or you can put a review on my website, anewcreation.org. And we have lots of reviews right now on both. And you can see what people are saying when they have read the book, how it's changed them and touched them. If you would like to know more about the Mitchell Thorpe Foundation and how you can help another child fighting for their tomorrow, you can go to mitchellthorpe.org. That's MITCHELLTHORP.
You have been listening to Stealingjune, a podcast.
And you can read all about what
Stealingjune is a ceramic production and was created, written, directed and hosted by Jared Warren.
But every book
for business inquiries, comments, or requests, please email us at ceramicprod@hotmail.com. That's SERAMICKPROD
so more topics. I hope
all rights reserved. 2022
the, movie deal comes through.
1 Timothy 1:15.
Someday soon we can have you back on and we can check in on the progress on that.
That would be amazing.
So
stay tuned.
Stay tuned. So, well, thank you, Beth, for being on today, and I hope you have a good day.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you for having me.